everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps, and today we're going to talk about crocheting with beads. There are a lot of different techniques for crocheting with beads, but specifically today we're talking about pre-stringing the beads. So these are pre-strung onto the yarn before we start, which means that before you start crocheting, so before I started my first chain at the beginning, you want to string the beads onto your yarn, just using a yarn needle or whatever method you find easiest just to get the beads onto the yarn, and then you just keep them out of your way while you're crocheting until you're ready to use them. So I've crocheted a bit of a swatch and now I'm ready to add a bead, and the first thing that I have to do is set the bead. And by setting the bead, what I mean is push the bead up to the work. It's not all the way up to the hook, it's not here, but it's up adjacent to the last stitch that I worked, so it's right up against there as close as I can get it. If I leave it too big like this, I'm going to have a floppy stitch with a gap, so I want to get it nice and snug, but don't make this loop on your hook too tight, otherwise you'll struggle with the next stitch. So just snug there. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show you is going to be in a chain space. The cool part about doing it in a chain space is that it hangs down into the space, and I kind of really like that look. So I made a chain. Again, you can see I've snugged the bead up to my hook, and then when I do the next stitch, when I make that chain, it just sits right in the middle of the stitch. So if I'm making a chain space, I skip the next stitch and then I'm going to double crochet in this space. And let me show you how that looks on the other side. You can see the bead sticks out more on the other side when I do this, so I'm going to want to do it on wrong side rows if I'm doing it into the chain like this. But you can see it sort of hangs down underneath the chain, and you still got the nice even top, and then there's the bead hanging down. So I love using the chains with this technique. I just like the way it sits. From the side I'm working, it's not quite so prominent. So again, you want to do this only on the wrong side rows. Okay, so the next one, what if I want it in a double crochet? I don't want this gap, I just want the bead in the double crochet. Make myself a little bit of a buffer here, and now let's set another bead. Okay, and I want this in the top of the double crochet, so I'm going to set it up against here near the top, and then I do my yarn over, and then I finish my double crochet stitch. Now see, the bead is still sitting there next to the stitch, and I want to make sure it stays there. I don't want to let it roll over to the front because that's a different position. So let the bead stay there, finish my stitch, make sure the bead is right where I want it, and now it's at the top of that double crochet just underneath the top V of the stitch. So that position is the top of the double crochet, and it's really centered right in the middle there. It looks the same from the other side. Here, let me turn it around properly. It looks the same from the other side as it does from the front. Or maybe a little bit more prominent on the back, but not much. It's pretty even. So now the next, sorry, a little more prominent on the front, but it's pretty even. It looks pretty much the same on both sides. So now the next placement I want to do is in the middle of the double crochet. So I don't want this bead, let's set the bead. I don't want this bead here. I don't want it butting up against the stitch. I want it halfway through my stitch. So let's do the yarn over first and then set the bead. And this is kind of floppy because it's going to want to roll back over. So just hold it in place as well as you can, and you can adjust it later. You know what, let me put a buffer stitch in here first. Let's just do another double crochet so I have a little spacing in between. Okay, so now do the yarn over, set the bead, and go into the next stitch. Now I want to check the placement. If the bead rolls over here, well, I guess it really doesn't want to roll. But if the bead rolls over to the back where it was before, there we go, like that, then it's going to be in the same place that it was before. So I want the bead to be in front, okay, right up next to the bottom of the stitch here because that's where I want it. And then I'm going to do this half of the stitch, okay, and see the bead is there. It can still float around, so I want to make sure it stays there while I finish the stitch. So now I've got the bead in the bottom half of the stitch, and this one is sitting totally in the front. Let me do one more stitch and then I'll turn it around for you. It's sitting totally in the front. It doesn't show at all on the back. You don't even know there's a bead there. The bead is right there and you can't see it at all. So depending on where you put it in the stitch, it's going to lie differently. If you put it in a slip stitch like this, it's not a slip stitch, a chain space like this, then it's going to show mostly on the back. If you put it at the top of the stitch, it's going to be pretty even and show on both sides. But if you put it in the middle of a double crochet stitch, then it's going to show really mainly on the front. And you can put these into single crochets too. There isn't really as much choice with single crochet. It's always going to be like this at the top of the stitch. But try it with different stitches, try different placements. There is no right or wrong, so just see what works for you. And that is how you crochet with beads.